Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into a world where the ground is always damp beneath your feet, where the air smells of wood smoke, manure, and stale ale, and where every sunrise means another day of aching muscles, empty stomachs, and someone else's rules. You're not a knight or a lady, not even a merchant. You're a medieval peasant, and you probably won't survive this. Your life is tied to a patch of earth you don't own, ruled by a lord who might not even remember your name, and the only way out is through death or by running so far you never see your village again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the thin gray light of dawn filtering through the thatch above your head. The fire burned low in the night, and now the room is chilly enough that your breath curls in front of your face. Beside you, your wife stirs under the rough wool blanket, while your children remain in a small huddle of sleep, tangled together for warmth. In the far corner, the goat shifts on its hooves, giving a soft bleat, reminding you it's hungry too. The packed earth under your feet is cold as you swing your legs out of bed, and your tunic feels just as scratchy as it did yesterday, not because it's poorly made, but because it hasn't been washed in weeks. The hut smells like smoke, sweat, and yesterday's boiled cabbage, a blend that never really leaves. You tug on your belt of braided hemp, making sure your small knife is secured. It's the only metal tool you own personally, and it's worth more than any coin you've held. Outside, the lane is quiet, except for the muffled grunts of someone chopping wood and the lowing of cattle penned in the common. The air is sharp, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones before you've even taken a dozen steps. Your first stop is the strip of field you've been assigned, narrow, uneven part of the open field system shared by the whole village. The soil clings heavy to your worn shoes as you walk, and the smell of manure spreads across the land. You bend to your work, pulling weeds from between the young rye shoots, your fingers already numb. This field isn't truly yours. You're working it as part of the rent you pay in labor. When harvest comes, the Lord's share will be taken first, and what's left will have to feed your family until the next harvest, if it lasts that long. By mid-morning, the church bell rings, and you know it's time to shift to the domain, the Lord's private land. Here the soil is better, the tools sometimes sharper, and the watchful eye of the bailiff is constant. You work under his gaze, turning the soil with the worn plow behind two slow, patient oxen. The wind cuts across the open field, carrying with it the distant scent of the Lord's kitchen, a hint of roasting meat you know will never touch your tongue. The day moves in the rhythm you know too well, pull, lift, push, turn. Sweat beads at your brow despite the cold. When your back aches, you straighten for a moment, glancing toward the manor house, a squat stone building on a low rise surrounded by a wooden palisade. It's not grand, like the castles in stories, but it's still a world apart from your hut. The Lord sleeps on a feather bed, while you lay on straw, crawling with fleas. He eats bread made from fine white flour. Yours is coarse, dark, and hard enough to crack a tooth. When the bailiff finally calls a halt, you trudge back toward the village. The sun is low now, painting the fields in pale gold, but you feel no warmth in it. Your wife has a pot simmering over the hearth. When you step inside, the smell of leeks and barley greeting you. The children are bright-eyed for a moment, happy to see you, before they sink back into the quiet that hunger often brings. You eat slowly, savoring the simple heat of the food, knowing there's no second helping. Later, as darkness settles over the village, you mend a worn strap on the goat's harness, the leather stiff under your fingers. The fire pops softly, and the day's aches begin to creep deeper into your bones. Outside, an owl calls from somewhere in the trees, and the wind rattles the wattle fence. You lie down on the straw bed, pulling the blanket over your shoulders, already knowing tomorrow will come too soon, and it will look much like today. The rooster's cry cuts through the still dark morning, though you were already half awake lying there listening to the soft breathing of your wife and children. The fire has died to cold ash, and the air inside the hut has a bite to it. You rise carefully so as not to wake the children, though the goat's low bleat in the corner is enough to stir them anyway. A pale hint of dawn is only just beginning to seep through the gaps in the thatch. Your first steps outside land on frozen mud crusted white with frost. The lane is quiet, except for the distant sound of someone splitting wood. Across the village, a faint column of smoke rises from a neighbor's hearth. You pull your cloak tighter and make your way toward the shed, where the tools are kept, taking up the hoe and a bundle of twine for today's work. The Lord Steward has ordered repairs to the boundary hedges around the common pasture, and your turn has come. The pasture itself lies beyond the last huts, a broad sweep of winter-yellow grass, bordered by rough, thorny hedgerows. These hedges keep the cattle from wandering too far and mark the line between village land and the Lord's private ground. You work with Thomas, who's already there, stripping branches from a cut hazel pole to weave into the gaps. The thorns bite through your gloves more than once, and small beads of blood sting your cold fingers. You grit your teeth and keep weaving, knowing the bailiff will inspect the work before dusk. By mid-morning, the frost is melting into damp, and your shoes are wet through. You pause only long enough to chew a crust of rye bread and sip from your flask of thin ale. The bread is hard, the ale sour, but it keeps you moving. You glance at Thomas, who's working in silence, his breath misting in the cold air. No one wastes words on days like this. There's too much to do and too little warmth to spare. In the distance, the manor rises over the fields, its stone walls gray against the pale winter sky. You know that behind those walls, the Lord's household is already at their morning meal, white bread, butter, perhaps even eggs and bacon. The thought makes the taste of your crust feel even rougher in your mouth, but you swallow it down and return to the hedge. The work continues through the short winter day, the sun barely climbing, before beginning its slow descent again. You weave and tie, push and hammer, bending the young hazel poles into place until the hedge is solid enough to turn a cow. When the bailiff comes by in the late afternoon, his eyes narrow as he looks over your work. He prods the hedge with his staff, nods once, and moves on without a word. It's the closest you'll get to praise. With the work finished, you walk back toward the village with Thomas, your shoulders aching from the cold and the strain. The lane is busier now. Women drawing water from the well, children carrying bundles of kindling, the smell of smoke thicker in the air. You duck into your hut, and the heat from the fire hits you like a blanket. Your wife is stirring a pot of pottage, the smell of cabbage and onions filling the room. The children are seated nearby, their cheeks flushed from the fire's warmth. The meal is simple but hot, and you eat it with quiet gratitude. Afterward, you take your place by the hearth with a small pile of leather scraps, cutting and shaping them into straps to mend the oxen's harness. The sound of the knife against the wood beneath the leather is rhythmic, steady. Your wife hums softly over her sewing, and the children doze where they sit. When the last scrap is cut and set aside, you lean back, feeling the heaviness in your limbs. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the hut's walls, but inside it's warm, dim, and still. You let your eyes close, knowing that tomorrow will bring another summons, another piece of work, to keep you tied to this life. The thought doesn't surprise you anymore. It's simply the shape of your days. The thin gray of dawn filters through the smoke hole, and before your eyes are fully open, you hear the muffled sound of boots in the lane. A voice calls out names, and yours is among them. You know what it means, manor work again, whether you planned for it or not. Your wife hands you the last of yesterday's bread, and you chew it while fastening your belt, the taste dry and bitter in your mouth. The air outside is damp and cold, clinging to your skin as you make your way toward the green. A handful of other men are gathered there, shoulders hunched against the wind. The reeve stands at the front with the steward, a parchment in hand. Today you're assigned to the road-mending crew, filling the deep ruts with gravel and tamping them flat so the Lord's cart won't break an axle on the way to market. It's work that will take most of the day, and you'll see little benefit from it yourself. You shoulder a wicker basket filled with gravel and follow the others to the stretch of road that leads from the manor to the main track. The ruts are deep from weeks of rain filled with muddy water that soaks into your shoes as soon as you step into them. You dump the first load into a rut, spread it with a shovel, and pound it down with a heavy wooden mallet. The impact jars your arms, sending a dull ache into your shoulders. By mid-morning, the work has become mechanical haul dump spread pound. Your back begins to ache, and your hands are slick with mud and grit. A light drizzle starts beating on your cloak and dripping from the hood into your eyes. No one complains. Complaints won't fill the road any faster, and the bailiff's gaze is sharp enough to silence most men before they open their mouths. The short midday break is nothing more than standing in the lee of a hedgerow to eat. You tear at the bread with your teeth, wash it down with a swallow of ale, and keep your eyes on the ground, saving your warmth for the work still ahead. Around you, the others do the same. In the afternoon, the rain stops, leaving the road a patchwork of wet gravel and steaming earth. Your arms are leaden by the time the steward calls an end to the day's labor. The bailiff walks the length of the repaired road, inspecting each section. His nod is curt, and without ceremony, you're dismissed. The walk home is slow, your boots heavy with mud. The sky is already darkening when you reach the hut. Inside, the fire is lit, and your wife has a thin soup ready, flavored with a few herbs she saved from summer. The children crowd close, eager for warmth, and for the little you brought home a small bundle of wood scraps left from the road, work enough to feed the fire a bit longer tonight. After eating, you set to repairing a wooden bucket whose handle has split. The smell of damp wood fills the air as you work the firelight, catching on the edge of your knife. Your wife sits across from you, patching a worn tunic while the children doze against her side. Outside, the night settles in quiet, except for the faint howl of a dog somewhere on the far side of the village. You pause for a moment, hands resting on the bucket, and feel the heaviness of the day pressing on you. This is what life has become, a string of days tied together by labor hunger and the slow passing of the seasons. You know that tomorrow will be no different, and yet you will rise again because that is what's required of you. You set the bucket aside, bank the fire, and let the dark take the rest of the day away. The cold has sharpened overnight, and when you wake, the air inside the hut feels brittle, every breath like drawing frost into your lungs. You rise quietly, pulling your tunic over your head, the rough wool scratching at your skin. Your wife is already at the hearth, coaxing the fire from embers, her breath visible in the dim light. The children stir, but don't rise. There's no need for them to face the morning chill before they must. Today you've planned work for yourself, mending the small plot that lies behind your hut, the one you tend in the hours left after the Lord's labor. The fence has sagged in places, and one corner leans dangerously from the weight of snow. If it falls, the goat will wander, and you can't afford to lose even a single animal. You step into the lane, the snow crunching under your boots. The village is half-stirred smoke beginning to rise from hearths, a few figures bent over their morning tasks. The sun hangs low, a pale light, that offers nothing in the way of warmth. You gather tools from the shed, a wooden mallet, a handful of stakes, and a coil of cord. The work is slow. Each post must be dug out of the frozen ground, straightened, and wedged back in place. Your fingers ache from the cold, and more than once you pause to breathe warmth into them. The goat watches you from its pen, chewing idly, the steam from its breath curling into the cold air. You talk to it out of habit, not expecting it to understand, just to keep the silence from pressing too hard. By mid-morning, the fence is holding again, sturdy enough to last until spring. You take a moment to stand back, feeling a small, quiet satisfaction in the work. It's one of the few tasks you can do entirely for your own benefit. The rest of your life belongs to someone else. Your wife calls you in for the midday meal: barley bread and a thin leek broth. The warmth of the bowl seeps into your hands as you eat, the taste simple, but enough to fill you for the hours ahead. After the meal, you help her carry a bundle of laundry to the stream. The snow is shallow here, but the water's edge is rimmed with ice. You break it with a stick, the sharp sound echoing across the still fields. She kneels to scrub, and you take over when her hands turn red from the cold. The icy water stings, but you endure it, knowing this too must be done. On the way back, you spot the bailiff riding toward the village. His cloak is lined with fur, and his boots are clean despite the snow. You step aside as he passes, giving a short nod. He glances down at you, but says nothing, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the distance. You watch him go, feeling the small twist in your gut that always comes when you're reminded how differently you live from those who rule over you. The afternoon is spent chopping wood. You work in the small clearing near your hut, splitting logs into kindling, the steady rhythm of axe on wood marking the slow passage of time. The smell of fresh-cut timber rises into the cold air, and your breath fogs with each swing. By the time the sun begins to sink, your arms are heavy, and your back protests with every movement. Inside, the fire burns brightly, fed by the day's work. Your wife stirs a pot over the hearth, the scent of cabbage filling the room. The children sit on the floor, playing with a small collection of pebbles and bits of carved wood. You settle onto the bench, feeling the heat soak into your skin, the day's aches beginning to ease. When the meal is done, you patch a hole in your cloak by the firelight, your wife working beside you. Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters. You pause to listen, then return to your sewing, the thread pulling tight through the fabric. It's the kind of quiet that can lull you to sleep, the kind that makes the walls of your hut feel like a shield against the world. As night settles in, you bank the fire and stretch out on the straw bed. The warmth clings faintly, and you close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will arrive the same as every day, before it cold, demanding, and unchanging. And yet you'll meet it, because here survival is as much a habit as it is a need. You wake to the sound of boots crunching on frozen ground outside, followed by a firm knock on the hut's wooden doorframe. Before you even open your eyes, you know it's a summons. The Lord's steward is making his rounds, gathering men for another day of service on the domain. Your wife hands you a hunk of bread still warm from the hearth, and you eat it in 2 bites while fastening your belt. The children watch quietly from their place near the fire, their eyes tracking you as you step out into the cold. The air is sharp, the kind that makes your ears ache within minutes. A few other men are already assembled in the lane, cloaks wrapped tight, tools slung over their shoulders. The steward announces the task for the day, clearing drainage ditches around the Lord's barley fields. You join the slow march toward the edge of the domain, the pale sun barely lifting above the horizon. The ditch is half frozen, the water sluggish beneath a thin skin of ice. Your spade bites into the cold, wet soil, each lift heavier than the last. You work alongside Thomas, who mutters about his aching hands between breaths. The two of you find a rhythm, dig, lift, toss, your movements steady and deliberate. The ground is stubborn, and more than once you strike a stone, sending a jolt up your arm. By mid-morning, your shoulders burn and your palms are raw despite the gloves. You pause only briefly to chew a piece of hard cheese from your pouch and take a swallow of ale. The bailiff makes his rounds, inspecting the work with a critical eye. When he stops in front of you, you straighten, spade in hand. He prods the cleared section with his staff grunts and moves on without a word. It's approval of a sort. The rest of the morning blurs into the rhythm of labor. You barely notice when the clouds thicken, the light dimming to a muted gray. The air grows damp, carrying the faint scent of rain. You dig faster, hoping to finish your section before the weather turns. When the midday meal comes, you huddle with the others against a hedgerow, sharing what little you have but bread, onions, a few slices of salted turnip. The talk drifts to the rumors of a new tax for bridge repairs miles away. Even here, far from the river, you'll be expected to contribute. The men sigh, but no one sounds surprised. By afternoon, the first drops of rain begin to fall, cold and persistent. The soil grows heavier, clinging to the spade and making each lift harder. You keep at it, muscles straining until the bailiff calls an end. The ditch runs clean and deep now, the water moving more freely toward the stream. The walk back to the village is slow, your boots heavy with mud. The rain follows you, pattering softly on your hood. Inside the hut, the warmth from the hearth greets you, and you shrug off your cloak, letting it steam by the fire. Your wife has pottage ready, thick with barley leeks and a hint of wild herbs. You eat in silence, savoring the heat more than the taste. After the meal, you check the tools you keep for your own work. The handle of your hoe is loose and you wedge it tight with a sliver of wood, tapping it into place with the mallet. Your wife hums while sewing a patch onto a child's tunic, the needle flashing in the firelight. The children curl up together, drowsy from the warmth. Outside, the rain turns to a fine mist, coating the world in a soft sheen. You step out briefly to bring in the goat, its breath rising in small clouds as it follows you inside. The smell of damp wool fills the room, but you don't mind. It's the smell of something you can keep alive through the winter. When the fire burns low, you lie down on the straw bed, pulling the blanket over you. The sound of the rain on the roof becomes steady, lulling you towards sleep. You close your eyes, knowing that tomorrow will bring new orders, new work, and the same unbroken chain of days that stretch from one season to the next. The rain has passed by morning, leaving the world wrapped in a damp chill. Mist clings to the hedgerows and drapes across the fields like a thin gray blanket. You step outside, boots sinking slightly into the softened ground, and breathe in the smell of wet earth. It's the kind of morning where sound travels strangely far, your own footsteps seem louder, and you can hear the faint bleat of sheep from past the churchyard. Today your work is your own, though that doesn't mean it will be any easier. The small strip of field you tend for your family needs clearing before the frost hardens again. Stones that surfaced during the autumn rains have to be picked out and carried away, or they'll catch the plow come spring. You fetch a wicker basket and set to it, bending to lift the stones, some small enough to fit in your palm, others heavy enough to make your back strain. The sun rises weakly, its light thin through the mist. Your hands grow cold around the damp stones, but you keep going, making slow progress across the field. Each clink of stone into the basket is a small step toward a smoother furrow and hopefully a better yield next harvest. The work is quiet, save for the occasional caw of a crow overhead. By mid-morning, the basket is heavy. You haul it to the edge of the field, dumping the stones in a growing pile that's been there for years. It's taller than you now, a silent monument, to the countless hours spent clearing this same patch of earth. You pause to roll your shoulders, feeling the ache settle in, then return to the rows. Your wife arrives with a small bundle wrapped in cloth bread and a wedge of cheese. She stays a while, leaning on the fence as you eat, her breath visible in the cold air. The two of you talk quietly about the stores in the loft and what's left of the salted meat. The news isn't good. You'll need to make the grain last longer if you want to see the first green shoots of spring without going hungry. When she heads back toward the hut, you return to work, the damp slowly seeping into your boots. The sky begins to clear, patches of pale blue showing through. The sunlight is weak but welcome, drying the mist from your cloak. You finish the last row just as the shadows start to lengthen. In the afternoon, you turn to repairing one of the wooden gates that marks the entrance to the common pasture. The hinges have loosened, and the latch no longer holds against the wind. You work with what you have, sharpening a new peg from a length of hazel, tightening the bindings with cord made from twisted flax. The wood smells fresh under your knife, a small reminder of warmer days. By the time the gate swings closed with a solid thump, the sun is low, and the village is coming alive with the sounds of evening dogs barking, hens settling in the muffled voices of neighbors calling to each other across the lane. You carry your tools back to the shed, stacking them neatly before heading inside. The fire is already lit, casting a warm glow across the room. Your wife is stirring a pot over the hearth, and the children are busy sorting a small pile of kindling into bundles. You wash your hands in a wooden bowl, the cold water biting at your skin, then take your seat at the table. Dinner is a thick stew made from whatever's at hand: onions, carrots, a handful of dried beans. The warmth spreads through you with each spoonful. Afterward, you sit by the fire, mending a strap from the oxen's harness, while the children play with a small carved figure, passing it back and forth. The day's work has left your muscles heavy, but the quiet of the evening wraps around you like a cloak. Outside, the last of the mist has lifted, and the night sky is clear, scattered with stars. You step out for a moment, breathing in the cold, crisp air, and let your eyes trace the familiar constellations. Then you turn back toward the warmth of the hut, ready to let the dark close over another day. The first sound you hear in the morning is the church bell, its dull clang echoing across the still air. It's not a feast day or a call to prayer. It's the reeve summoning the village men to the green. That means work for the manor, no matter what plans you had for your own field. You pull on your cloak, still damp from yesterday, and step outside into a world that's rimed with frost. Every blade of grass is stiff and pale, and the lane crunches underfoot as you join the others heading toward the meeting place. The reeve stands with the bailiff, a parchment roll in hand, calling out names and assignments. Yours is for carting manure from the byre to the Lord's fallow fields, a job as unpleasant as it is necessary. You shoulder a pitchfork and follow the small group toward the manor's livestock pens. The smell reaches you before the sight of it, sharp and heavy, cutting through the cold air. The work starts quickly. You fork the dung into the wooden cart, steam rising in thick clouds as it hits the frosty air. The oxen shift in their yokes, stamping their hooves against the frozen ground. Once the cart is full, you and Thomas take the reins, guiding the slow team toward the fields. The wheels creak, mud and frost crunching beneath them. At the field's edge, you fork the load into rough piles, spreading it in wide arcs. The stench clings to you, sinking into your cloak and gloves, but you don't pause. There are more loads to fetch. By mid-morning, the rhythm is set, load haul, spread, return. Your arms and back ache from the constant lifting, and the cold in the air has shifted to a damp chill that seeps through the seams of your clothes. The oxen work steadily, their breath puffing in time with their slow steps. You glance toward the manor on one trip back, catching sight of a servant carrying firewood inside, and imagine the warmth of their kitchen. The midday break is taken standing by the cart, a crust of bread in one hand and your flask in the other. The bread is rough and the ale is sour, but they fill the emptiness enough to keep going. The talk among the men is quiet. Complaints about the work are only muttered when the bailiff is well out of earshot. The afternoon brings heavier loads as the frost begins to soften, making the dung wetter and harder to move. Your gloves are soaked through and the smell is stronger now, mixed with the earthy scent of thawing soil. You work until the bailiff calls an end, the fields dotted with dark patches where the manure lies waiting to be plowed under. The walk back to the village is slow. Your boots are heavy, your shoulders sore, and the stench follows you like a shadow. Inside the hut, your wife wrinkles her nose but says nothing, handing you a basin of cold water to wash. The water clouds instantly as you scrub your hands and face, but the smell never truly leaves. Dinner is a thin porridge bulked with a handful of chopped leeks. The warmth is welcome, though it does little to erase the taste of the day's work from your mouth. Afterward, you sit by the fire mending a cracked wooden rake. The children huddle close, their eyes half-lidded with sleep, while your wife works on a patch for your cloak. When the fire burns low, you stretch out on the straw bed, pulling the blanket up to your chin. The smell of the manure lingers faintly in your cloak, a reminder that no matter how much you scrub, some parts of this life sink too deep to wash away. You close your eyes, already hearing in your mind the next day's summons. The frost is gone by morning, replaced by a raw, damp air that settles in your bones before you've even stepped outside. The lane is soft with mud churned by the hooves of the Lord's horses and the wheels of his carts. You keep your hood low as you make your way to the small plot behind your hut. Today you mean to tend your own work, turning over the soil in the kitchen garden so it will be ready for planting when spring comes, but first you have to fetch water from the stream. The well in the village square is fine for drinking, but for soaking flax or washing tools you need the flowing water. You shoulder 2 wooden buckets, their iron handles cold against your palms, and make your way down the narrow path through the fields. The stream is swollen from days of rain, the banks slick with mud. You kneel to dip the buckets, the water biting at your hands as you lower them in. By the time they're full, your fingers are numb, and the weight pulls at your shoulders on the walk back. Your wife takes the water with a nod, setting one bucket near the hearth and another just outside the door. You warm your hands over the fire for a moment, then head back out to the garden. The soil is damp and heavy, clinging to the blade of your spade as you turn each clump. The smell of earth rises with every lift, rich, cold, and faintly sweet. You work methodically, your breath rising in pale clouds, the only sound the steady scrape and thump of the spade. By mid-morning, your back is warm with the effort, despite the chill in the air. Your wife brings you a small bundle bread and a boiled egg wrapped in cloth. You eat leaning against the fence, watching a few hens scratch at the ground nearby. The food is gone too quickly, but the pause is enough to give you the strength to keep going. In the early afternoon, Thomas stops by on his way to the smithy. He tells you the reeve is calling for men tomorrow to mend the road toward the next village. You nod, already calculating how much of your own work you can finish before being pulled into the manor's tasks again. The talk turns briefly to the stores in each of your lofts, both of you careful in your words, neither wanting to admit how close to the bottom you might be. Once the garden is turned, you gather the small pile of stones you've unearthed and carry them to the growing mound at the edge of the field. You've been adding to it for years, and still the earth gives up more with every season. You know you'll be back here again next year, lifting the same weight from the same stubborn ground. The light begins to fade, early the sky heavy with clouds that promise more rain. You put away the spade and bring in a few armfuls of kindling for the night. Inside the hut is warm and smells faintly of herbs your wife has been drying the last of the summer's mint above the hearth. The children are on the floor playing a quiet game with pebbles, their laughter soft in the dim light. You sit down at the table and begin repairing a split in one of the buckets. The wood is worn, but you wedge it with a sliver of pine and bind it with a strip of cloth dipped in pitch. It should hold a while longer, though you know nothing here lasts forever. After supper, pottage thickened with barley, you step outside for a moment. The air is damp and smells of the coming rain, and in the distance you can hear the muffled lowing of cattle. The village is mostly dark now, just the faint glow of fires through the chinks in the huts. You stand there a little longer, drawing in the night, before heading back inside to the warmth and the steady crackle of the fire. The rain comes in the night, steady and soaking, drumming softly on the thatch and seeping into the earth. By morning, the lane is a churn of mud and puddles, and the air has that damp heaviness that seeps into your cloak and bones alike. You wake to the sound of voices outside, low, purposeful. When you open the door, the reeve is in the lane with two of the Lord's men reading from a scrap of parchment. Your name is called before you have time to hope otherwise. The order is for clearing the drainage channel along the road to the market town. Too much rain has backed the water into the lower fields, and the Lord wants it flowing again before the next cart leaves with his grain. You grab your spade and join the small group heading out, boots already sucking in the mud. The channel runs in a shallow cut beside the road, half filled with silt and choked with weeds. The rain has made the ground soft, but the work is still slow, cutting, scooping, throwing the muck higher up the bank so it won't just slide back in. The road itself is slick, and you have to plant your feet carefully to keep from slipping. Every so often, a cart rattles past, splashing mud up your legs, the driver barely glancing at you. You keep your head down, working to the steady rhythm of shovel into earth lift and throw. The smell is a mix of wet soil, rotting leaves, and something sharper from the stagnant water that's been sitting too long. By mid-morning, your shoulders and back burn with the effort. The rain tapers to a mist, but the sky stays heavy and gray. You pause only briefly to chew a piece of bread from your pouch, the crust damp in your hand. Across the ditch, Thomas is working in silence, his face set against the cold. No one talks much in this weather. The work itself demands all the energy you have. When the steward comes to inspect you, straighten your back and wipe the mud from your gloves. He peers into the ditch, prods at the flow of water with his staff, then moves on without a word. The unspoken rule is simple: no scolding means you've done well enough. The afternoon feels longer, the light already dim by the time the bailiff calls an end. Your legs are stiff and your boots are heavy with caked mud. The walk back to the village is slow, the talk between the men sparse. Everyone is thinking of the warmth waiting at home. Inside your hut, the fire is a welcome glow, the air thick with the smell of a cabbage stew simmering in the pot. Your wife hands you a cloth to wipe the worst of the mud from your boots before you step fully inside. The children peek up from their corner, grinning when they see you, though they wrinkle their noses at the smell of damp wool and wet earth. You eat slowly, the heat from the food loosening the chill in your bones. Afterward, you sit by the fire, working a piece of wood into a new handle for your mallet. The shavings curl onto the floor, and the rhythmic scrape of your knife is a small, steady comfort. Your wife hums as she sews, and the children nod off one by one, their breathing blending with the low hiss of the fire. Before bed, you step outside for a moment. The rain has stopped, but the air is still damp and cool. The lane glistens faintly in the weak light from the moon, and somewhere far off, you hear the soft rush of water moving more freely through the ditch you helped clear. It's small, forgettable work, but you know that in this life, small things keep the whole from breaking. You turn back inside, close the door against the night, and let the darkness take the rest of the day away. The morning is still and cold, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, as if the village is holding its breath. You wake before the first light, lying on the straw bed, listening to the faint crackle of embers in the hearth. The fire is nearly gone, but enough remains for your wife to coax it back to life while you pull on your tunic. The goat shifts in the corner, giving a low bleat, and you know the day has already begun. Today's work is in the common pasture, mending the wattled fence that keeps the cattle from wandering into the Lord's grain fields. You gather what you'll need in a bundle of willow withies for weaving your small hand axe for trimming, and a coil of twine. The ground is hard with frost, each step along the lane crunching underfoot. A thin veil of mist lies low over the pasture, blurring the horizon. The fence sags in places, its woven branches loosened by wind and weather. You start by cutting fresh lengths of willow, their bark smooth and cold under your fingers. The work is steady, trim, weave, pull tight, your breath clouding in the cold air. Occasionally you pause to strike the end of a post with the mallet, driving it deeper into the ground. The sound echoes faintly through the stillness. By mid-morning, the frost has begun to soften, and your hands are damp from handling the wood. Your wife comes by with a small bundle of food, rye bread, a sliver of cheese, and an onion. You eat leaning against the fence, watching the cattle nose through the grass, their breath rising in slow, steady clouds. When the bailiff rides past, you nod a greeting. He reins in briefly, scanning the fence with a practiced eye. "That'll hold," he says simply, before moving on. It's rare to hear words from him that aren't orders or warnings, and they settle in your mind as you go back to work. The afternoon brings a shift in the wind, carrying with it the scent of smoke from the village. You finish weaving the last section and test it with a firm push. The branches hold, and you step back, rubbing your aching hands together. The sun is low now, turning the frost to water that glistens in the fading light. Back at the hut, the fire burns brighter, and the smell of herbs and barley greets you. Your wife has added a handful of dried peas to the pot, the broth thick and fragrant. The children are at the table, their chatter a soft background to the crackle of the fire. You sit, letting the warmth seep into you as you eat. After the meal, you set to repairing a wooden pail whose handle has worn thin. You shave a new piece of oak to fit the knife gliding in smooth curls. The work is slow, but the feel of the wood under your hands is familiar grounding. Your wife hums as she works on a length of mending, the children dozing against her side. Before you settle for the night, you step outside. The sky is clear, the stars sharp and bright against the dark. The air is cold enough to make your breath catch, but you linger a moment, letting the stillness wrap around you. In the distance, the cattle are quiet, the new section of fence holding them where they belong. You turn back inside, close the door, and let the firelight be the last thing you see before sleep takes you. The wind changes in the night, and by morning, it's coming from the north, sharp and cutting. The air inside the hut feels colder than usual, even with the fire still clinging to a few coals. You can see your breath as you dress, pulling your cloak close before stepping into the lane. The sky is pale and cloudless, the kind of weather that brings no snow, but still freezes the ground hard. The reeve's voice carries across the village green, calling for men to help haul timber from the woodland to the manor. You join the small group, falling into step with Thomas as you head toward the edge of the forest. Your boots crunch over frozen ruts, the sound sharp in the stillness. The trees stand tall and bare, their branches creaking as the wind moves through them. The bailiff points out the trees to be taken straight young pines for repairs to the manor's outbuildings. You swing your axe, the cold steel biting into the wood with a satisfying crack. Chips scatter at your feet, pale against the dark earth. The work is hard, each swing a pull on your shoulders, each fall of the axe a shiver up your arms. When the first tree groans and tips, you step back to let it fall, the sound echoing deep into the forest. Once the trunks are stripped of branches, you and Thomas take hold of the ropes, dragging the timber toward the cart. The frozen ground makes for easier sliding, but the weight still digs into your muscles, your breath coming in clouds as you lean into the pull. Load after load is stacked onto the cart until the bailiff gives the signal to return. The cart wheels groan as they roll over the ruts back to the manor yard. There the steward stands, waiting, marking each load on his parchment, before sending the team back for more. You work until the sun is low, the light slanting gold through the bare branches. By the time the last timber is delivered, your arms and back are stiff, and the cold has settled deep into your bones. You walk back toward the village with the others, the air smelling faintly of wood smoke as the chimneys come into view. Inside your hut, the warmth from the fire wraps around you. Your wife ladles out a thick stew, the scent rich with herbs she must have been saving. You eat slowly, letting the heat of the broth push back the chill. The children are quiet tonight, huddled together with their small carved toys, their eyelids heavy. After the meal, you take a whetstone to your axe, the steady scrape of metal on stone filling the quiet. The blade gleams in the firelight when you're done, ready for the next call to the woods. Your wife finishes her sewing, folding the mended tunic neatly before setting it aside. Before bed, you step outside to check the goat's pen. The moon is bright, casting silver light over the snow-dusted ground. The cold stings your face, but you stand for a moment anyway, listening to the faint creak of the trees in the distance. Then you head back inside, bar the door, and sink into the straw bed, the day's weight pulling you quickly toward sleep. The morning comes with a pale light creeping in through the thatch, but no sound of the Reeves' voice in the lane. That means the day is yours, or at least as much as a day can belong to a peasant. You decide to use it for repairing the small tools you rely on, the ones that can't wait until spring. After breaking your fast on bread and a thin smear of goose fat, you step outside into the crisp air. Frost glitters on the bare branches, and the ground is firm under your boots. You head to the shed and pull out your hoe, noticing how the handle has loosened where it meets the blade. Sitting on the bench just outside the hut, you wedge in a thin strip of oak, tapping it into place with the mallet. The wood makes a clean, sharp sound in the cold morning air. Your wife calls you to help with the wash. The stream is the only place to do it, so you each take a load of linen and tunics in a wicker basket, making your way down the narrow path. The frost still clings to the grass, crunching underfoot, and your breath hangs in front of you. At the bank, you break the thin ice crust on the surface with a stick, the crack echoing in the stillness. The water is biting cold. Your fingers sting as you scrub the fabric against a flat stone. Steam rises from your hands when you pull them out, and you rub them quickly to bring the feeling back. Back at the hut, the clothes are hung from a line strung across the rafters, dripping slowly near the fire. You share a midday meal of boiled beans and onions, the warmth of the bowl soothing your chilled hands. The afternoon is for tending the goat and patching the pen. You cut fresh lengths of hazel to replace the weaker posts, sharpening the ends to drive them into the frozen ground. The goat watches, chewing steadily as you work. When the fence holds firm under your hand, you feel a small satisfaction. In a life ruled by duties to others, these moments when you keep something of your own safe are rare. Later, you bring in more firewood, stacking it neatly by the hearth. The smell of wood smoke mixes with the scent of a turnip and leek stew bubbling in the pot. The children sit close to the fire, playing with a length of string, looping it between their fingers to make shapes. After the meal, you sit at the table with your knife carving a new peg for the yoke. The shavings curl onto the table, and you push them into a small pile to be used as kindling tomorrow. Your wife hums as she mends a sleeve, her voice low and steady. Outside, the frost is already forming again, silvering the lane under the pale light of the moon. Before bed, you step out into the still night. The air is sharp and clean, and you can hear the faint rustle of the bare branches in the wind. The village lies quiet, each hut a dark mound against the white frost. You breathe in the cold and let it settle inside you before turning back to the warmth of the hut, ready to face another day when the sun rises again. The frost is thick when you wake, coating every branch and thatch roof in a pale shimmer. Your breath hangs in the air even before you leave the bed, and the coals in the hearth are nothing more than a faint red glow. You stir them back to life, feeding and kindling, until the flames catch and the light spills across the packed earth floor. Word reaches you quickly. The Lord Steward wants ditches cleared in the far meadow before the thaw. The water must flow freely, or the grazing land will turn to marsh by spring. You eat quickly stale bread dipped in warm ale, and join the other men heading out with spades and mattocks over their shoulders. The ground crunches under your boots, but in the low spots the frost is softer, already touched by the faint warmth of the rising sun. The meadow lies wide and open, the grass brittle underfoot. The ditches are little more than narrow cuts, now their edges collapsed in places where the earth has slumped. You set the blade of your spade into the frozen soil, using your foot to drive it down. The sound is sharp, the jolt running up your leg. Once the first chunk breaks, the rest comes more easily, the frost cracking away to reveal the darker, wetter soil beneath. Work is steady and repetitive, cutting the banks back, throwing the earth higher, pulling out clumps of matted roots. Your hands ache from the cold, even through the stiff leather gloves. Around midday, you stand for a moment stretching your back and watch a skein of geese fly low over the meadow, their calls carrying on the wind. The steward rides by his cloak, billowing behind him, offering no more than a curt nod before moving on. You return to your spade, knowing that the measure of the day is in the depth and straightness of the ditch, not in any word of thanks. By afternoon, the sun is low, and the frost has melted enough to make the work messier. The soil clings to your boots in heavy clumps, and the spade grows slick with mud. Still, the water begins to run more freely in the cleared sections, its slow gurgle a small sign that the job is working. When the day ends, you walk back to the village with the others, the air cooling quickly under the fading light. Inside the hut, the warmth of the fire hits you like a wool. Your wife has a pot of barley and cabbage stew on the boil, the smell rich and earthy. You peel off your boots and sit by the hearth, letting the heat sink into your stiff hands. After the meal, you take a moment to repair the strap on your satchel, threading a needle through the tough leather by firelight. The children sit nearby, their heads leaning together as they whisper in a game of make-believe. The steady hum of your wife's voice as she tells them a story mixes with the crackle of the fire, and you feel the tightness in your back slowly ease. Before sleep, you step outside. The frost is already creeping back, silvering the meadow in the distance. Somewhere in the dark, you hear the faint rush of water in the newly cleared ditch, a quiet proof of the day's labor. You breathe in the cold and let it fill your chest before returning to the small, warm space you call home. The morning breaks under a sky the color of pewter, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke drifting from the village chimneys. You wake to the low, restless bleating of the goat, and when you step outside, you see the cause one of the pen's posts has leaned after last night's wind, leaving a gap wide enough for trouble. You set your jaw knowing this will be the first task of the day. You fetch the mallet and a length of hazel, trimming it with your knife until the point is sharp. The ground is cold and unyielding, and it takes all your weight to drive the post deep enough to hold. The goat watches with a wary eye, stamping once before returning to her hay. You weave a few fresh branches between the uprights to strengthen the fence, your fingers growing numb in the chill. By mid-morning, the reeve comes through the lane, his voice carrying the news. The mill's wheel is clogged again. The river must be running clear if the village is to have flour, so you join the small group heading down the muddy track toward the water. The mill sits low on the bank, its great wooden wheel motionless, crusted with frozen weeds and branches that have caught in its paddles. You roll up your sleeves and wade in the cold, biting so sharply it steals your breath. The silt swirls around your legs as you heave at the tangled mass, the current tugging stubbornly. Bit by bit, the debris loosens and drifts downstream, the wheel shuddering once before it begins to turn again. The rhythmic splash and groan of its motion is oddly comforting, a sign that bread will come from the oven in the days ahead. When the work is done, you stamp your feet on the bank to drive out the numbness and accept a chunk of coarse bread from Thomas, shared without a word. You eat looking out over the water, the low winter sun catching on its rippled surface. The walk back to the village is slow, the mud clinging to your boots, but the sight of smoke curling from your chimney pulls you on. Inside, the fire has been built high, and the air is fragrant with a pot of lentils and carrots simmering gently. You peel off your wet hose and stretch your legs toward the hearth, the heat stinging as it seeps back into your skin. The afternoon is spent patching a tear in your cloak with a piece of wool saved from an older garment. Your wife threads the needle for you, her hands steadier than yours after years of fine mending. The children crowd around to watch one of them, holding the thread taut while you work. It's slow going, but by the time the light fades, the seam is strong, and the cloak will keep out the worst of the wind. After supper, you sit by the fire, sharpening your knife, the rasp of metal on stone, a steady, familiar rhythm. Outside, the wind has risen again, rattling the shutters and sending a low moan through the thatch. You listen to it for a while, the sound mingling with the soft breathing of your family. Before bed, you step into the lane. The moon is hidden behind thick clouds, and the air smells of rain to come. The village is dark and still, each hut sealed tight against the cold. You pull your cloak closer and return to the warmth inside, grateful for even the small comforts this life allows. The rain arrives before dawn, a steady drumming on the thatch that seeps into your dreams and pulls you awake. When you step outside, the lane is already a ribbon of mud, the puddles rippling under the constant patter. The air smells rich with wet earth, and though you pull your cloak tight, the damp finds its way in. The reeve is waiting by the green hood, drawn low, calling for hands to repair the thatch on one of the manor's grain barns before the leak spoils the stores. You join the small band of men slogging through the mud toward the edge of the estate. The barn looms dark and broad, the smell of grain and damp straw hanging heavy inside. Climbing onto the roof, you feel the slickness of wet reeds beneath your hands. The repair is a slow, careful process, pulling away the rotted sections, weaving in new bundles, tamping them down with the flat of your hand. Rain runs down your sleeves and drips from your chin, but the work can't be paused. Grain is the lifeblood of the manor, and a leak left to spread could mean hunger later. From up here, you can see the village crouched low against the gray sky, the thin threads of smoke curling upward and dispersing into the mist. The fields beyond lie sodden and dark furrows filling with water. The sheep huddle in a tight knot near the far hedge, their wool clumped with wet. By midday, your fingers are stiff from the cold, but the worst of the leak is sealed. You climb down, hands raw from the reeds, and share a quick meal of bread and salted pork under the eaves. The rain hasn't eased, but the knowledge that the grain is safe lends a quiet satisfaction. The walk home is slow, each step a squelch in the sodden lane. When you reach your hut, your wife is waiting with a basin of warm water to wash the grime from your hands. The fire burns high, casting a golden light across the damp floor. The children sit close to the hearth, playing quietly, while the smell of pottage fills the room. You eat with your family, the warmth of the stew pushing away the chill that settled in your bones. Afterward, you hang your cloak near the fire to dry, and take up your knife to shape a new handle for the small spade. The shavings curl and fall at your feet. The sound soft against the patter of rain on the roof. When night comes, you step outside once more. The rain has eased to a mist, and the air is cool and fresh. The lane glistens faintly in the moonlight, breaking through the clouds. You take a deep breath, tasting the damp and the earth, and let it fill you before returning inside. The day has been hard, but like all days, it ends here with a fire, a roof overhead, and the small circle of your family's warmth in the middle of a cold, wet world. And now, as you let your eyes grow heavy, imagine that the rain outside your own window is the same rain that fell on those muddy medieval lanes. Hear it patter softly against the roof, a rhythm that blurs the day's labor into a gentle haze. The firelight flickers low, casting long shadows on the walls, just as it did in a peasant's hut centuries ago. Your cloak hangs to dry, the faint scent of wet reeds and wood smoke still clinging to it. The tools you use today rest in their place, edges, sharpened handles smoothed, waiting for the next call to work. There's a quiet order in that, knowing that though the days are never easy, they follow the same patient cycle: work, warmth, rest, and work again. Picture yourself leaning back on the straw bed, the blanket drawn over your shoulders, the sounds of your family's breathing around you. Outside, the world is hushed, the mud cooling the fields dark and still. You can almost hear the distant gurgle of a ditch cleared days before, water flowing steady under the moonlight. Let the weight of your limbs sink into the bedding, as if all the labor has drained from them, leaving only the soft pull of rest. Feel the fire's last warmth on your skin, the kind that lingers even as the embers fade. The air is cool but not unkind, wrapping around you like the night itself. And as your breath slows, remember, in this small, quiet moment, you are safe. The roof holds, the food is stored, and tomorrow will wait until the sun rises again.